Hey there, my name is Carey Sobel. I am the chair of the M&A Source Marketing Committee, and today I am joined by Dr. Allen, formerly Dr. Allen Nazeri. And today I'm going to ask, just a couple questions, and really looking forward to introducing you to, the M&A Source community that do not know you yet, and for any future members that join. Dr. Allen, tell me a little bit about yourself and your practice, if you don't mind.
Carrie, thank you so much for having me. And really, I'm glad you're doing these podcasts. I think they're very, very useful. I used to be a dentist for many years. And back in 2012, I decided that I did not want to do clinical dentistry anymore. And over the years, I had built and sold several of my dental practices. So I decided to move on to the world of finance and investment banking, initially focused on healthcare. We have recently expanded into engineering, manufacturing, automation, and robotics, but healthcare remains to be a big part of my practice. We cover about 52 different verticals in healthcare, anywhere from physician practices to maybe nursing homes and pharmaceutical companies, health technology companies, AI, and healthcare manufacturing. I mean, healthcare is very broad. So that is pretty much the major focus of my practice.
Excellent. I think it's a fun space to play in. It's definitely an emerging market in so many different ways. And, getting to know you before this, your practice extends not just from the United States, but also Southeast Asia and Europe. So you have a really nice global footprint within your verticals that you serve.
That is correct. So we actually have an office in Bangkok, Thailand, with a team of about 11 people. And I initially started in Thailand and Singapore, Thailand being the global hub for healthcare. They got a lot of great hospitals and so forth, did a lot of business development activities for some very large publicly listed and privately held healthcare companies, and gradually went into the world of basically deal making.
Fascinating, and probably could not even have enough time in interview session like this to hear some of the things you've come across in deal making in such a large space and large global footprint. So, I'm going to ask you a tough question. I'd love to hear a little bit about a particular story. We call them war stories in this space of something that you feel like would be worth sharing that other M&A advisors may be able to relate to, a problem, the twist and turn, the solution, wherever it ended up. If you wouldn't mind, pick one of those really good, juicy stories that you can share with us.
Let me ask you, how much time do we have? Have a lot of us.
We'll do a part one, we'll do a part two, but, you know, we'll take whatever you want to give us today.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I appreciate the question. I mean, I always say, as in M&A looks really glamorous from outside because people only see really the closing announcements, the press releases, the multiples, but really anyone who's lived these transactions, they know that the real work really happens in the trenches. And it's an emotional roller coaster, right? It's people don't realize it is very, very difficult. I was a dentist, so I know how difficult is as doing something physically, but mentally speaking, it is a very, very difficult profession. But the good thing is you learn with every deal, every case, and really the companies you deal with, right? These are not spreadsheets. They're really often someone's life's work and their family wealth. And it's important that we, be able to manage a lot of the sellers and buyers' expectations. But really the lessons I can share with you is there are many scars that comes from really messy diligences and valuation gaps and confidentiality risk. But one of the, I think, the most painful lessons that I experienced actually last year was a group of doctors. I'm trying to be very anonymous here. That it took me almost 2 years to bring the listing onto the market, and they were several partners in this medical group, and we ended up finally, getting the listing signed, and then it took maybe an additional 6 months to really prepare their financials to bring them to the market. And before they engaged me, they had contacted some local brokers and some other people in the field, and they had valued the practice, the group, right around one times revenue, which was at the time about, $17 million in revenue. And after I actually went through their financials, I noticed that these doctors were taking excessive amount of salary out, more than an average physician. They were probably taking roughly close to about $2 million a year in salaries. So really, on the adjusted basis, their EBITDA was right around, 5.5, $6 million. So I told them that, I think whoever is talking to you is really underpricing your company, because based on some of the recent transactions I had done for medical groups, the company should worth, probably roughly around $50 million. And the partners obviously were excited, but at the same time, they were skeptical, because they never thought that, someone can get them a $50 million valuation offer, and they were thinking more about 17, maybe $20 million there. So we end up, getting multiple offers within, first 45 days, right between 40 to $50 million. And we ended up, tweaking an LOI and helping them, with a lot of the different points on the LOI. And that's kind of like my practice. I mean, I put myself in their shoes, and sometimes I am a tough negotiator when it comes with the buyers, but at the same time, I think I buy the buyer's respect. And many times it has happened that the buyer comes back to me several years later and they want me to represent them as well. But all of this was well until we got the LOI signed. And once the LOI was signed, one of the partners decided that he wants to have an attorney who had represented him throughout his life, and he was next to him during his divorce, to kind of take a look at this LOI. So the first opportunity that this attorney had to interact with me, he asked for a copy of our fee agreement that was signed 2 years back. And that's pretty unusual, because, typically these fee agreements are reviewed and negotiated by attorneys, well ahead of time. And the first thing he came back at was that your fees are too high, and we were charging, a standard, 6% fee that was negotiated at the time. And he wanted to, reduce our fee. And, at that point, I decided not to cave. And I knew the value I brought to them was very, very high, right? I mean, they were thinking about selling it for 17, $20 million. Now they have an offer for $50 million. So all I can tell you, the conversation did not go very well with the attorney, but then finally the partners caved, and they decided to keep me, on the LOI and with the buyer, and they went ahead and signed the LOI. As soon as they signed the LOI, we received a notice of cancellation of the LOI, or not. I'm sorry, not the cancellation of our listing. which basically it's an anticipatory breach of contract. And this was, again, a total shock because I had never seen anything like this. The gentleman who I partner with, had been through something similar, but not as big of a deal as this one. So we had to immediately file a lawsuit on the group. And the other thing we learned was that, sometimes, you always, like in partnerships, right? You have one person who is doing all of the talking for other partners, and you assume that, the other partners are all in agreement, even though the contract our agreement specifically states that anyone who signs this contract is representing the company. I think they were trying to dispute the fact that the other partners really were not aware of this particular agreement. And then, throughout, the positions and everything else we went through, their attorney was trying to deviate the case from the fact that, that they don't owe us the money, to the fact that they would owe us the money on any amount that is distributed to the company as a whole rather than to the individuals. So anyway, we ended up settling the agreement. It is pending on another transaction, but it was really a painful process because, I worked almost 3 years on this deal and hoping that, as a firm, we can have a $3 million commission, and but then we ended up spending, over 100 grand just on attorney fees. So that's something that, stands out for me as far as the scars.
Incredibly unfortunate to hear. I hope that it works out well in the end. I know it's still up in the air. My question is, I assume that the business did not actually transact. They didn't actually sell the business.
Correct. So obviously the buyers backed out, and it's a big mistake for the sellers to think that, they basically can get away by not paying someone's commission, because what happens is when there is a lawsuit, obviously it becomes a public knowledge, and especially in healthcare, it's all about confidentiality to begin with, but especially in healthcare, right? So in healthcare, you don't want people to know that, your business was for sale and somehow there has been a lawsuit because you're trying to not pay your broker. So yes, the transaction did not go through.
How far along were you in the transaction process when all of this arose?
Well, we had negotiated we helped the sellers negotiate the LOIs, and the LOI was signed. So, so it was right the day after they signed the LOI, they decided they want to cancel their agreement with us.
Let's say they wouldn't have canceled the LOI based on your, decorated past and deep experience. How long do you think it would have taken from that point in time to likely get to a closing?
Probably in about 90 days.
If most of the terms have already been negotiated, I assume that you worked for quite a bit of time with the prospective buying group, besides all of the work that you had done prior, 2 years working with that seller. How long were you engaged with the particular group that was trying to buy it?
Probably easily about 60 days. I mean, that is where you have to make a decision. Do you want to, how hard you want to negotiate on the LOI, right? We always tell the sellers as well. But there are many points on the LOI that, again, you learn through experience that has to be raised up front, because you don't want them to go through all the due diligence process and then you get to the purchase sell agreement and then you're negotiating at that point. it is a fine line between, do you want to, try to be really hard on negotiating the LOI or not, but I have found it's better to lay out all the terms up front than, going months getting the listing off the market, and really the buyer's also spending a lot of money on, QE, and your seller's going through all that due diligence process, and then coming not coming into an agreement when the purchase sale agreement is being presented to them.
We do the same thing with our practice. We spend a lot of time on the LOI, way more than we had in the past, just to try to prevent anything that we possibly can based on, our experience selling similar businesses, or, things that we've learned that could be snags along the road. But, you know, I actually typically advise that we do as much work as buyer and seller are willing to do on the LOI before we march towards, the final documents.
I think the LOI, the exclusivity period is something, again, I've learned. I have some scars there, is that, you really have to have a specific timelines for the buyers. And because if they're not able to perform within a certain period of time, you got to get your listing back on the market, right? And some buyers, they don't like that. I mean, they don't like the fact that, I put a specific time where they need to show proof of funds, or they need to show that they have engaged a QE firm. So I know they're spending money on due diligence, right? Or have a deadline for when we need to see the initial drafts for, let's say the purchase sale agreement, or the employment agreement. So I think those are very, very important, because again, I've learned through, you know, mistakes, that sometimes if you do not have those, the buyers can keep taking their time all the way to the very end, and negotiating the deadlines, because as LOI is just a milestone, right? So I always tell my sellers, don't spend the money yet, emotionally, right? Because it's just where the battle begins. And as soon as the LOI is signed, the buyers typically have more leverage. So we need to somewhat control that process. And the other thing I have also found is that in the exclusivity period, depending on who you're dealing with, so if you're dealing with a private equity that is very fully funded, they have committed capital, is one thing, but there are so many other companies that they call themselves private equity these days, right? Search funds and independent sponsors, and so forth. So what happens is, a lot of times they tie up a company while they're also looking at other deals. Well, I don't see why there should not be a bilateral exclusivity. Because again, if it's a big firm, I don't expect them to do it, right? But if it's a smaller firm, I need them to be focused fully on the transaction. Because if they're distracted, and like we had a sales meeting this morning, we have a buyer that has 4 LOIs on 4 different, business opportunities in 4 different verticals. I mean, how are you going to get these to the finish line? Okay. So you have to pretty much sometimes be the bad guy, and for your sellers, and tell the buyers, hey, we can't do that.
I love the concept of a bilateral exclusivity. I might take that page from your book. I'll give you credit for it, but I really like that idea. I have not ever thought of that before.
Yeah, even if it's not for all the verticals, for the vertical that they are, like I did a home healthcare, right, deal. Well, the buyer was looking at a bunch of other home healthcare deals at the same time. I don't mind if it's a bigger private equity firm and they're looking at, let's say, a physician practice. But don't look at any home health care while you have this one under exclusivity. It's our time, it's our energy, and we don't get paid until the deal closes. So okay.
I like it. Speaking of getting paid in unfortunate situations like the one that you shared. How many times in your career have you had to deal with, any type of lawsuit to try to collect, whether it's from circumvention or something like the case that you had previously explained?
Unfortunately, we have one other case which they circumvented us and they sold it to the buyer that we had procured. But it was a smaller deal. It's a $5 million enterprise value asking price, and that one we are pretty confident the court is going to rule in our favor. But it thankfully it doesn't happen often. Most people are honest, they're good. But as you know, there are really three types of really sellers out there. One is that they really don't like to have a broker at all. They look at the broker or intermediary as an expense, right? So they'll do anything they can to get rid of the broker. The second group, they appreciate what a advisor or broker can do, but then they hire you as an experienced advisor, but then they try to get advice from their cousin Johnny, who's a divorce attorney, or they try to bring somebody else into the mix, maybe another broker from another firm, and and they never completely trust you 100% to take your advice, right? And then it's like having many chefs in the kitchen where the food becomes too salty, right? That's the plan. And then you have the third type. The third type, they believe in you. They listen to everything you tell them because we've been through this process. It's again for them is probably once in a lifetime they're selling a business. I have sold 6, 7 businesses myself personally. I have sold at least 35, 40 for other people, you have a lot of experience where you can show them the haphazards on the road, right? So that is the group that really is always great to work with. They always give you the best referrals, and the referrals become just like them. And they just tell them, hey, listen, just listen to Alan, just do what he tells you, and he gets you to the finish line.
There's nothing better than the referral. We don't really do too much, next to none, on the marketing and advertising and, reach out. It's really just referral basis of you need to talk to this guy. And, it's funny, Dr. Allen, because I feel like us as brokers, just as sellers are vetting us, to represent them, we're vetting the sellers to make sure it's somebody that we want to do business with. And there's only so much that we can actually
100%.
do before we go into that. So it's hoping that you can take somebody at face value and go down this journey of a large exit, which for some people is the first and only time they'll ever do it. You better trust your advisor and you better have a good relationship with them or her.
100%. And there's a power to say no to a bad client, whether that's a seller or becomes a buyer. I mean, there are many times I have to blacklist buyers, right? Because buyers that they somehow, are abusive to the relationship, and they don't realize this because that's always noted with the intermediary and the broker. And the last thing a buyer wants to do is bully an intermediary or broker. The best deals always goes to the buyers who have good relationship with the intermediary. I mean, I have several deals that are private listings with their large platforms. All I do is I call them. I say, hey, Alan, or Joe, I have this listing. You want to sign the NDA? And they immediately do that. So yes, you have to put up a resistance to bad buyers or sellers.
Dr. Allen, I'm going to absolutely ask you for more of your time because I want to hear some more of these stories. I think one of the most fascinating spaces to be an M&A advisor is in healthcare. So I'm going to ask if you could join me again for another one of these in the future. I want to hear some more of the war stories. But we're doing this exercise through the M&A Source, and we're looking to spread the word about what the M&A Source is and the value that it creates. So if you wouldn't mind telling me, how long have you been involved with the M&A Source, and what type of value is it that you get for being a member?
Yeah, absolutely, Carey. I mean, when I was a dentist, I was a CE junkie and continuing education junkie, right? And I had one of the highest producing dental groups practices with some of the best patients in the world that people can envy. I have brought the same philosophy here. Continuing education is absolutely important. And I think M&A Source has been a great, great provider of that sort of education for me. Unfortunately, I just joined like 2, 3 years ago with M&A Source, but I've been trying to go to all the conferences. I've gone through all of the trainings, the certifications, and all that, and I continue, taking additional courses here and there because it is not at every event, at every classroom, you learn one nugget, right? There's one that little valuable lesson that you can apply to your, M&A practice. So I think M&A Source is just an amazing association, and I hope everyone who has not joined join the group and collaborate. Yeah, for sure.
Excellent. I appreciate that. And on behalf of the M&A Source, I know they do as well. One other question, you alluded to this a little bit, but one of the canned questions that I wanted to ask people that I speak about is, what is a focused area, for your practice, given where you're currently at and where your practice is going? And I know you talked a little bit about, the industries that you're opening up to, but maybe you could just expand to what's next for your firm.
Yeah, so obviously the core part of our business is healthcare because my background was healthcare and I gravitate toward that. I think I have the reputation in the healthcare community with both the buyers and the sellers, but we do have several managing directors that have engineering backgrounds, and so Prime Exits has expanded its, listings to engineering, manufacturing, robotics, and automation. But healthcare is wide, right? So it's about 52 different verticals. And, you can have healthcare manufacturing. It's funny, sometimes I talk to different private equity groups. They come in and they say, we don't do healthcare. And then I tell them, do you do healthcare manufacturing? Say, oh yeah, we can. So because people realize they mix up healthcare, or they think healthcare is just physician practices. Healthcare is vast, So yeah, that's what our main focus is, and we'll continue, doing that. But I'll be happy to, be an advisor or a guide to anyone who has a healthcare deal, and really guide them throughout the process.
It's excellent. Thank you so much, and I really appreciate your time today. And I look forward to seeing you hopefully at the conference coming up in a couple of weeks.